Okay, we're sitting behind the track and field right here. We got it open. This is where all the problems started. The one simple thing that caused this whole mess I will get into in just a minute. But first we have to go back in time and start from the beginning. If you follow the channel, you know I picked up this cab. It was actually a Tetris that I bought for $400. And the more I think about it now, I feel like it wasn't that great of a deal at the time. The cabinet was in horrible shape. You can see that some of the wood was just brittle and you couldn't even sand it, and it gets this like texture feeling. It's almost like it got wet or damp or moisture, and it's just really hard to fix. And even the corners and the bottom were just torn up, and so much Bondo was needed to fix this thing. It just really wasn't that good of a deal. I didn't even get the board for Tetris either. It was just a track and field cab with a working CRT. Now, the bottom was so mangled that I actually made a mistake on this when I refurbished it, and I curved the front edge of the bottom. It's actually supposed to be a straight kind of 90-degree angle, but it was so banged up I didn't even know that it wasn't a curved front on the track and field. It should have been a 90-degree angle. Now, the problem all started at the top of the machine as I looked at the top and the board was in such bad condition I needed to rebuild the top of the cabinet. Now, in the top of the cabinet is the power switch normally, as well as a light fixture that goes underneath for the fluorescent bulb. Well, none of it worked. It was completely mangled, so I ended up pulling the whole thing out and cutting a new top piece for the cabinet. Now, when I did this, I started cutting wires and everything went wrong. I started looking at all the wires I cut and some of the connections and the power flow through, and I couldn't make heads of tails of anything. There were wires looped into Molex connectors. There were green wires going into Molex and then black wires coming out, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. So what did I do? I started from the beginning. I redid the whole powering schematic and wires. I used Bob Roberts' simple diagram here with the power going into the AC filter, then to the distribution block, and then to your power supply and the isolation transformer, and pretty simple when you just follow it. So I redid the whole wiring. Now, I would have thought this would have been great and everything would have worked, but when I was ready to turn on the unit, and first you obviously check power, I could not get my 5-volt correct. The 5-volt from the switching power supply would only go up to 4.6, and I couldn't figure this out for the life of me. I've turned the power all the way up and it would still only go up to 4.6. So the first probably solution, which I did, was buy a new power supply. So I get that power supply and the same thing happened. Only could get to 4.6. This is where the simple solution was so important and would have saved me so much time. I started asking everybody, what is going on here? Do you know what I can do to fix this? And finally, Arcade Repair Tips just came out and said, well, I'm looking at the diagram and the track and field is set up for 110 or 115 volt as well as 220 volt. So that led to a conversation, and then finally Arcade Repair Tips said, well, check your power supply and see if it's set to 220. Well, I didn't even know that these things would set from 110 or 220. I didn't even know that was an option. So I looked at obviously the first power supply and it was set to 220. But then when I got the new power supply, that was also set to 220. So both power supplies were set to 220. On some power supplies, there's a little node that you have to pull a plug off and move it. You got to take it apart and move it onto a node to change it. The second power supply I got was a simple switch. You just switch it from 110 to 220. And that is what fixed the problem. All I had to do was switch it. I would have never figured this out thanks to Jonathan at Arcade Repair Tips, who really didn't know what was going on and then kind of put 2 and 2 together while he was looking at the track and field schematic and seeing all the 220 diagrams and everything. And that was the simple fix. Now we have a clean, working track and field, fully restored. We do have some minor changes with the power switch up here when I redid the top, but other than that, it's in original condition pretty much. We did have to get a Konami JAMMA adapter here so we could just plug and play. That worked out great. But other than that, guys, if you haven't seen my other video with the tips and tricks, I'll leave a link to that in the description. And as always, thanks for watching The Rexer Show.